Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Super excited about today's episode. We're joined by Steve Pemberton, Chief HR Officer at Workhuman. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. Doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I told you, you're my first podcast post-surgery, so if my jaw just freezes at some point, you can just take over. But I'm doing good. I love your background, by the way. Like, it really gives me a sense of like who you are. Like, it's something which has also been really cool over the last 2 years, right? Through this virtual portal into people's lives.
Yes, it is. You see not just what is important to them. You meet their pets and you meet their younger children. Their spouses. It's quite literally a window into their world, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And so for me, though I need to update some of these photos behind me, except the wedding one is there because in June I'll celebrate 25 years.
Wow.
Of marriage with my wife Tanya.
Amazing. Congrats. How long have you been together in total? Like the total time?
Oh boy, Chris, I have to come back and do another podcast on that.
Yeah.
We knew each other in total. We have known each other in total 26 years.
Wow.
I proposed to her 6 months after we met.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, in fact, but I told her on the very first day.
I'm going to marry you.
Second day. I told her that one day we were going to share the same last name.
Wow. Well, like that says something, because that would probably terrify most women and vice versa with most men, right? As well.
Yeah,
so it really was meant to be.
In two different kind of ways, right? Women going, whoa, wait a minute, and men too afraid to say it, But no, but she knew, and so did I. It wasn't, it was just certainty, It was
That's
certainty.
Crazy.
And it's turned out to be right. It was love at first sight, really.
Amazing. Like people always surprised when, because I'm still pretty young. I'm not saying you're old. My wife and I have been together for about nearly 15 years now. So my first and only girlfriend, and now wife. So we met when we were 17 as well. I didn't marry in the first year though. I think it took like 10 years.
Yeah, I think that can be forgiven. Get married as teenagers. I think that can be forgiven.
Yeah. So we were like, all right, we're gonna careers first, then buy a house. Like we kind of went like the traditional like career, house, marriage, then kid. Like, not that we had to do it that way. I find it just kind of felt right to do it.
The beauty of marriage, right, is you do what works for the two of you.
Exactly. There's no rules. There shouldn't be anyway. Tell everyone a little bit more about your background, because you have, a less traditional journey to many of the leaders that I speak to on the show.
Ironically, I was talking with my daughter about this yesterday. She's a junior in high school and is looking at colleges and universities. And I was telling her that I did something different in each decade. So what I was in my 20s was different than my 30s, different than my 40s, different than now here. I'll be 55, and also in June. And in my 20s, I worked in higher education. I was a college admissions officer for a state university of Massachusetts, and then my alma mater, Boston College, did that for 10 years. Then went into the private sector, began consulting with a company. That company was acquired by Monster.com, at which point I went along with that acquisition as part of one of the principals. And then I left there after a couple of years to start my own company in the consulting space. Me and a friend did. He still runs that company, actually. And I left after 3 years, returned back to Monster, but in a different role. I was actually running a P&L for the company. and then joined Walgreens back in 2011, and was there for 6 years before I moved on to Workhuman, where I'm now CHRO.
Amazing. What was the takeaway then, or message you were sharing with your daughter about the multiple careers? Why do you think, I'm assuming it wasn't planned that way, right?
It was not planned that way. A few things. One, that every stop on one's career is building a set of skills that are not immediately identifiable to you. Even setbacks aren't really, setbacks are just that, they're setbacks, but they're not failures, because there's a learning that comes from them. It's a difference, really, ultimately. And so even my years in higher education, I certainly wondered, how I was going to pivot. I couldn't see myself in the career for a really long time, but I also didn't see a path forward. I actually applied to law school, was headed to law school before the consulting opportunity arose. So I was also explaining, to her that college really, and even for much of your 20s, is for figuring out what it is that you want to do, because you're not really going to know. It's hearing from, your parents and extended family and, teachers, guidance counselors, but you don't know until
you taste it, right? You try it. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other thing I told her, I shared with her in that moment too, is something that, and I, in hindsight, would say that it was something I did not realize at the time, but don't stay too long any place where you're no longer learning. When you're not learning and you're not growing, you got to make a move. You have to make a move. You can't languish too long. I stayed, when I was in higher education, I stayed 5 years longer than I should have, because after 5 years, I wasn't learning anything new. I wasn't growing, but I also didn't see the pathway out, which is why I stayed another 5 years. And that costs you a lot. It costs you time, Chris, costs you earning power, costs you a lot of things. Fortunately, I corrected in time. But I also, have taken that with me and next, every stage of my career. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's important, because I think similar as well. Like I got my first job at 17 and I was there for 10 years. And I'd say probably 5 years too long. I was doing the same job, and I was, yes, I was making more money and, rising up the ranks in the company, but I wasn't learning anything new. I was doing the same thing over and over again. And I couldn't explain to my wife or my friends why I wasn't fulfilled. They were like, why you should be so happy, Chris? And, you're making all this money. And especially we came from quite a poor upbringing. And I was like, but I just feel I'm not excited to get out of bed every day, because I'm just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I was like, there's got to be something more than this. Yeah. And then I took the extreme version of that, which was starting a company, because there's a never-ending learning curve of doing what I'm doing. But I did realize when I started this company that I had, kind of to your point earlier, stacked these skills over the years. And I didn't even know that I had stacked some of these skills that would come really in handy. For example, people always say to me, Chris, you do this podcast, I'm like you seem to be good at asking good open questions and engaging in conversation. I'm like, well, I was a sales director for 10 years.
Right.
All I did was ask open questions and listen. That was literally my entire, I used to do training on how you do that. And I didn't even connect that dot, and I was like, oh, this is really transferable. Or just the people skills that I got along the way of hiring, and just so much stuff, or the ability to learn. For example, like every single week we had a different thing that the sales team and I would focus on, and when I left, I continued that. Like the idea of going a week without progressing or learning something new or adding another skill to my toolbox is just strange. And similar, before even I got into business, I played ice hockey, I played basketball, and what are you doing there? You're coachable, you're learning, you're growing, you're developing that muscle. Whereas I realized, like, the more I train, the more I learn, the better I'm going to be on the ice. And I took that same set of skills into business. And I didn't know any of this and until like now I can reflect a little bit and be like, wow, like that really helped me. Like if I didn't do that, I probably wouldn't be here where I am now.
Yeah, and it equips you as a result to do a lot of different things, you know. And I would come to learn that question I had in my 20s, what and where can I go next? What can I do next? Where can I go next? And part of that was really a doubt as to whether or not I could.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anybody to tell me, you know, because you grow up poor or because you grow up as I did in the foster care system, there's a certain kind of restlessness that you have.
Yeah.
There's a certain kind of urgency with which you live that's very hard to describe to somebody who has not lived that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you look at it in that context of growing up and not being able to make choices and having choices made for you, and I'm not talking about like teenage rebellion, I want to do my own thing. It's like just not able to afford things, not having stability, normalcy in my world. And that never leaves you.
No.
The question is, where am I going to direct that? Is the question. So when I'm talking with young people, Chris, especially those who are in similar situations to the one that I was in, I'm very clear and emphatic with them about what their possibilities are. Because the circumstances, that's what one is born into, but you didn't create that. Mm-hmm. That's what you're born into.
Yeah.
The possibilities, on the other hand, that's what you own. Nobody else owns that. You own that.
I love that.
And in fact, you know, the success that one achieves, or at least the perception of that success, you know, to others only invites more of that from them.
100%.
I, you know, some years ago, I wrote my first book, and it was about my coming of age journey. And growing up in very turbulent foster homes, violent places, very difficult places, managed to get out of that, get to college, graduate, you know, and then off into the career that I just described. So, Chris, the book's out there in the market, so to speak. And I was really writing it for my children because they were asking me where was my mother and father. So that's what I was writing it for. And I wasn't thinking about an audience beyond the three of them. So that was my audience, really, and future generations. The way I constructed the book was that, you know, the turbulence and the difficulty, all that, I wanted to get out of that in the book when you read it fairly quickly. So the first third of the book is about those very difficult circumstances that I've been born into. But the remaining 2/3 was about the search for family and the ups and downs and the mystery of identity, because I didn't know where I'd come from and who I looked like. I knew nothing. And I began to realize that a lot of people who are reading the book, I want them asking myself, well, did you read the whole thing? Because they were only focused on the first third. And I'm like, you know, wait a minute. This is, you know, that's really the prelude, really. And I was baffled by this for the longest time. And then I realized that what I was doing, it's true for you too, is that when you share your journey of overcoming challenging circumstances, what you don't realize you're doing is you're telling and sharing with other people that they can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And what I came to learn, some people don't want that. They don't want that. They don't want to accept this idea, as I did, as I suspect you did, that there are some things that they're not our fault, but they are our responsibility. And that can be a very challenging message for some people to hear, because how dare you, Chris? You know, how dare you do what I would not sacrifice to do? How dare you, you know, it's almost as if you don't know you're doing it. You're actually holding up a mirror to them and you're saying, hey, listen, I'm not exceptional. you could have done what I did. And so I have people in my family, one of my father's brothers in particular, Chris, who this guy has come at me with a degree of venom, barely know him, only met him 3 or 4 times in my life, but sees my quote unquote success and decides to try and tear me down. And somebody asked me about this not too long ago, and I said, they asked me my reaction to it, and I said, you know, he's clearly upset because he thinks that the only way that he can accept my life the way it is if he says that I achieved it illegitimately.
Yeah.
Because this idea that I would have sacrificed, I would have endured, he can't accept that. But the reason he can't accept it is because he didn't do it.
No,
So,
it's 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, I think about it. It is a general, like a life mantra. I think we all have a lot of them. One of mine is don't walk through the world wearing somebody else's chains. Those are their chains. And what you can't do, what you cannot be, what is not possible either in your personal life and or in your career.
Yeah.
Those are their chains. So why would you walk through the world wearing somebody else's chains? That's about their expectations. And that revelation for me was happened when our first child arrived, because I started, and I know there's no doubt happened, you get so much advice. You know, when your wife's expecting.
Yeah, from everyone.
You know, everybody gives you advice on what to do and what not to do. I realized that they were giving me advice that they wish they followed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I relate to so much of what you just said, by the way. And that was probably one of the most challenging things for me was that. All right. On to HR. I love starting the conversation that way and learning more about you and your background, because that really shapes everything that we are, you know. I'll be interested to hear your perspective on the evolution of HR, because we've definitely come a long way, especially in the last 2 years.
Oh, yeah. If ever there is a book of HR that's going to be written, this would be, the start of the next section of the book. That's the effect that the pandemic, has had. Ironically, as a term, human resources has been around since the 1890s. That's how old that term is. And it referred really, quite literally, like how it sounds, resources to, humans are resources too, in the way that raw materials are. And there's a certain lens and view of that has withstood time. It's very much from a management kind of perspective. And I think that from a management perspective, resources has dominated rather than human in the term human resources. The pandemic changed that. And as a result, the after effects of it is going to be with us for a really, really long time, because it was quite literally humans and their humanity who helped us navigate through the pandemic, whether it was the rapid development of vaccines or people who stocked grocery shelves. Nearly everybody in the healthcare field, it was their humanity, right, that we saw on display. Even in our own organizations, if you weren't on the front line of the pandemic, if you worked in HR, you and your teams were the ones responsible for getting people home in that first week if they were out on business travel and shelter-in-place orders come out, to helping them navigate the world when there are personal losses, to creating policies around vaccinations and safety protocols, and now into designing hybrid. It has been, to me, HR's shiniest moment, mm-hmm. by far.
Yeah.
For anyone, either in HR or outside of it, whoever questioned the impact and the importance and the value of the profession that is HR, the pandemic was the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. Because it was the great test of the function. It was a great test of the profession that had not specifically been trained for it. You know, you could say that people in the healthcare field are trained to deal with crisis, not a global pandemic per se, but there is something in the language and in the ether of healthcare that's not quite the same when you're dealing with getting people, you know, home. Now, we're not dealing with life and death the way that they are, though in some cases we are, but not like people in the healthcare field are. And I'm saying that to say that original ideation of the word and the phrase human resources needs to fade. And in fact, Chris, at Workhuman, we don't refer to ourselves as the HR team. We refer to ourselves as the human experience team, mm-hmm. because that's what we do. You know, we create experiences for our humans at Workhuman in a way that helps them realize their greatest potential. And they return that value back to the company time and over again.
Yeah, no, I agree. Something that stood out to me in our last call, which kind of came back to mind, is you mentioned we went from policy to purpose. Mm-hmm. As another statement that really kind of stuck with me. And people take care of people, right? And how does it make you feel looking back at how HR rose to the occasion during the last 2 years?
Well, you know, beyond the pandemic, what it helped me realize, or affirmed, I guess you might say, is that even prior to that, we are quite literally the people who take care of people, because we're the one function outside of your individual boss who really steps a lot into your life. Yeah. You know, we know when you get married because you're making changes to your benefits. We know when you're having a baby. We know when you buy a home. We know when you've suffered a loss in your family. We know when you go back to get another degree. I mean, we quite literally are the group that knows just about everything that happens when it does happen. If you all of a sudden are thrust into the world of disability, we know that. And it just heightened to me the value, the impact of what we do and the way in which we do it. And it's really quite literally a lighthouse for HR that we can keep setting our sail towards. That every day we wake up and what we do is going to touch and impact somebody's life. And it could be anything from just thinking about my last, couple of conversations around promoting someone. And they sit down with Chris, you've done a great job. Annual review time, we're going to promote you. Now you go home, and this is all hypothetical, of course, and you've gotten this promotion, new title, bump in salary, and you might sit down with your significant other and say, well, we're now in a financial position to expand the family, if that's what we want to do. Or we can take a portion of this and put towards retirement, right? So there's this wonderful waterfall effect of what we do in HR because of the way that we're touching and impacting people, like every single day. That is very, very different than a widget-like approach to managing human beings.
Yeah. And similar, would you say then the impact that also transcends into wider society as well?
I would take it a step further than that. I would say that so many other parts of society where you would expect this to be the case is broken down. Here in the United States, we live, regrettably so, in a world of relentless polarization. It doesn't matter the issue. It doesn't matter the platform. It's almost as if they exist solely to create collisions and separation and divisions. Like, yeah, they're not really there to inform. They're not there to heal. it seems to me. It seems that they're to present really collisions and then monetize those collisions.
Mm-hmm.
But those collisions cost you character. And it's true in broader societies, it's true in smaller organizations. But if the denominator of interaction is collision, then that does change the character ultimately. So where now do you turn then? If seemingly every other part of one's life is polarized, or the snarkiness or vitriol on social media platforms. So where do you turn? Well, you're turning actually to the place that you work and the people with whom you work. So if you look at who are the most trusted voices in societies today, it's not news media, it's not elected officials, it's our boss and our organizations. That's who we trust. And because that's where trust is, now that's where community is. That's the foundation of community is trust.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise to me that we're now seeing the workplace as becoming something a little bit more than this is just a place where I go to have a job and to make money and provide for my family. I think it's leveled up in terms of importance because there are so many other voids in society.
Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me, I think in the beginning of the pandemic, Edelman did their sort of Edelman Trust Barometer survey that they do.
Yes.
And it showed that, didn't it? It showed that people, it was showing like, where do you get your source of trust or news? I think they were using like the news specifically, and they're like, people would rather choose and trust their own organization than their government. So they were going to their HR teams and their businesses and their leaders for advice about their life and, you know, safety, COVID, etc., before their own government. And it, like, whilst it was like, it took me a few like minutes to think about it. I was like, it's true. It's probably, it's true. Like, it makes sense because there's so much noise and, as you said, like chaos and collisions and like polarization outside there that many people's spaces in those communities or ERGs in their organizations or just their teams,
Sure.
You know, in many cases that was the glue that kept people together during these times.
Yeah, the trust is earned trust that's come from those organizations and it's come from HR.
Yeah.
Because when you come to us with a challenge, then we don't have the luxury of collisions. You're asking us to solve something, and we have to solve that, you know, for you. And it could also be when you could be dealing with something that is adverse within an organization too, and you come to HR to solve it. We deliver, in other words. So we're trusted as organizations, and I think we're trusted as HR functions because we deliver. That's why.
Yeah. It's interesting.
That's what I mean when you say it's earned.
I was speaking to a CHRO the other day, and she was like, Chris, I never thought that if you asked me a few years ago that I would be head of a task force just battling a global pandemic and a war, I would, you know, what can prepare you for that? You know, your HR masters ain't going to help. Like, do you know, and she said that as a joke, but she was like, you know, like where the work that's being done, it's just not just HR, it's the whole business or organization, but a lot of this does fall on HR. It's kind of blows my mind, if I'm being honest, that HR's had to step up to the plate and everyone look towards HR and say, what do we do about this global panic? What do we do? How do we, you know, take care of our people during a war? Like the war that's going on right now. And it's just like, it's hard to take in.
Yeah. I mean, I have and read a lot of books on HR. Haven't found the chapter on managing a global pandemic yet, though. Haven't seen that one. You know, it wasn't out there, right? That's not in the book of HR.
No. Yeah.
Nor has there been, by the way, a lot of emphasis either, I would tell you, in those same books on crisis management. That's kind of what that was, you know, and it continues to be. So what that tells us, though, is that the foundation of the profession that is HR, to our earlier conversation about stacking skills.
Yeah.
Well, we're the function, in hindsight, that would have been the most prepared for a crisis like that. and why. And it's one of the things that I described and I keep describing in terms of the lighthouse effect of HR. We have to pivot very quickly, generally, even before the pandemic, from a circumstance to a possibility, because that's what a lighthouse does. Physical structure that is a lighthouse says, I see you out on the ocean. You're in a tough circumstance. You either don't know where you're going, you're in the middle of a storm, and you don't know what to do next. But by his very presence, the lighthouse is focused not on that, doesn't blame you for it, doesn't say, well, what were you doing sailing in the middle of a storm, or why didn't you know a storm was? It's not focused on the circumstance at all. It's more focused on the possibilities, actually. And to the degree that there's any secret is how quickly do you make that pivot? This is true in our personal lives. This is true in our professional lives too. How quickly do you move from a circumstance to a possibility? How long does that take you? Now, to our earlier conversation, there are some folks who never make it. They never pivot. And in fact, they blame others. Then you have others, I suspect, a bit like you and a bit like me. It's almost instantaneous, because it's become a habit and it's a foundation of how you approach life, right? Well, HR does that every single day because you are in solution mode and fix it mindset, because you have to be. If you don't solve, it's not going to get solved. That, I thought, was going to equip us well to handle this unexpected pandemic. And now you're seeing the same thing unfold with this avalanche effect of a war. Because what does that mean? Now you have humanity, again, at the core, suffering. And what do we have to do? How do we pivot from that circumstance to the possibility?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And tell everyone more about the book briefly as well, though. Why did you write that? Why, like the Lighthouse effect? Yeah,
Cruising Altitude. So the first book did very well. In fact, quite literally this morning, I heard from a man from Nigeria. He wrote me this morning.
Amazing.
And said he just read A Chance in the World, my first book. And he said that he works very specifically with street children, he calls them, who have found themselves in circumstances. And he said, I've read your book, and would you mind joining virtually the group of kids that I work with? So I'm going to do that. When I was writing my first book, Chris, I had no idea, right, that I was writing really for him, But I can tell you that every day I get a message like that from some part of the world, because the book became a bestseller, it became a movie, it became all these things I wasn't trying to do. I was just trying to write down my journey for my children. That's what I was doing. Now, the book, Chris, explodes. I remember the day it arrived in the mail. I was like, great, I did that, moving on, Well, 10 years later, actually now, 10 years later, I'm still trying to move on, right? Because it just is kept like the message from the man from Nigeria. But here's what it did, which led to the second book. I encountered, and I'm sure this happens for you too, when you just share like a cruising altitude version of your story, there are people who say, Chris, I know exactly what you're talking about. Don't have the same story as you, but I have a similar chapter.
Yeah.
Happens to you all the time, happens to me all the time. I didn't realize that when I was writing my first book, that it was an invitation for people to share their journeys with me. And when people do that, while I've always respected and am honored, and I really appreciate their reaction to my journey, I, on the other hand, am looking at them going, like, you're the incredible one. And that happens time and time again. You begin to think about this broader opportunity to focus on the seemingly everyday people. That's something that we can all do. So that's what I did. I wrote about these 10 people who I encountered during my life journey. I met them at different times in my life, as a young boy, in foster care, in college, and as recently as a few years ago. And in each instance, they reminded me or taught me something really important. And what they taught me that was important was one of the many lessons of the Lighthouse. So the high school teacher took me in when I was 16, and I quite literally had nowhere to go. 3 days after Christmas, he opens up his home to me. I was supposed to stay with him for a few weeks, and it turned into my last year of high school. Well, what was his lighthouse effect on me? Well, I had come to him with a lot of doubts because society had really cast me off and in essence said, you don't have a chance in the world. So you do have a lot of doubts when you go through a situation like that because you're not affirmed and nobody's talking to you about your possibilities, only your circumstances. So what was his lighthouse effect on me? John Sykes, he turned my doubts into destination. Right? He would continually tell me that because of what I had endured, I was going to achieve more than I could ever imagine. That was his lighthouse effect. And the other 9 that I write about, same kinds of things. But it was also a call to action, I would say lastly, that we should all reflect on the people who are the human lighthouses in our life. That's number 1. Who are those people? The second thing we can do is we can ask ourselves about the people for whom we are the lighthouse, and we don't know it. And that's one of the many beauties of the architectural structure that is the lighthouse. The lighthouse never knows who sees it because you can't sail up close to a lighthouse. It's too dangerous.
Yes.
But you see it off in the distance. It guides you. And so its very presence gives us courage and conviction and hope and strength and resilience. It's very present. That's true for human beings too. Our very presence is a lighthouse to somebody else, and we don't know it. Which leads me to the third thing. And since that is the case, how can we now be more deliberate? How can we be more purposeful in our everyday interactions to be that lighthouse for someone else?
Wow. I love that. It reminded me of, I didn't tell you this before the call, but my mum's a foster parent now.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. I didn't tell you. I don't know why I didn't tell you that. So she's got 3. So my mum was a single parent with 4 kids. And when we left, she became a teacher for a while. And then she said, well, I've got 3 rooms and there are kids out there that don't have any, don't have a home. And so she has fostered many kids. And one of and they're family members. I don't even, they are family members. That's how yeah. And you made me think because when they initially come, right, they come with that baggage and what you just described of no one's ever given them a chance and they've always been judged by their circumstances, right? And they're like, this is my life. There's sort of this acceptance. And then they rebel and they act out and they, and it's hard. But seeing the change that they go through, having someone like my mum who believes in them and says Morgan, who's just leaving us now, she's turned 17. So she's kind of out of the age bracket now to be in foster care. So now she's getting her own apartment and stuff like that. Right.
Yeah.
And to see where she was when she first came, where the first few weeks she would run away literally run away and we have to find her. She kept running away from home and running away from foster care. And it was just because that fear of someone letting her down again. So she didn't want to open up. And then seeing her personal growth. And I could see that was because my mum believed in her and was someone who's a cheerleader. You can do this. You can do it. You don't have to worry about, you don't have to be, you don't have to, those chains. You don't have to hold those, you don't need to carry those chains with you from what happened with your parents and that. And it's just, when she left recently, it was really emotional because you could see the journey of how far she's come as well. And it's amazing. And my mum, I don't know how she does it, if I'm being honest. I'm like, Mum, you barely had us 4, which was hard enough. And now you have more kids coming in constantly to do it. So it's amazing that you had that person as that lighthouse for you early on.
Well, clearly your mother is a lighthouse. There's this great Greek proverb actually, that says a society grows great when the elders of that society plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit.
Yeah.
We never really get to see fully, anyway, how the story turns out. None of us do.
Yeah.
But you do need those lighthouses to help you break a cycle, and that's clearly what she's doing.
Yeah.
And giving them a chance too,
and
giving them a chance.
And sometimes though, like going back to the organization, sometimes those lighthouses is a leader seeing something in you that you haven't seen in yourself. You know,
Very true.
I've seen that. I've been in that position where I've had people that I've seen more in them that perhaps they have, and vice versa for me. For me, it's interesting you asked that question, because now I'm thinking about who are the lighthouses in my life. And I would say one of those is my co-founder, his dad, because I grew up without a male in the household, and whenever times were bad at home, or I needed some sort of direction or structure, I would look to his dad and his parents, and I would go. He's my co-founder is my next door neighbor, by the way, growing up. Okay. So we've been on this whole journey together as well, and it would be in the way he treated me as if I was his son, like equal to Shane, and he would treat me the same way, and would, you know, he would pay for things because I obviously couldn't pay for anything because I didn't have any money. He would take me to pick me up and drop me off from ice hockey with his son, right? And he taught me, you know, he made me, even now, the way I am as a dad to Robin, I think about the things of how he treated me and Shane. Always encouraged us to do things, you know, even when we failed, he was like, that's great. That's like, celebrated failure with us. And, you know, even when we drove home from hockey crying as kids that we lost, he would be like smiling and like, let's go again. And like, he definitely was a lighthouse in my life along the way as well. And then similar with one of my PE teachers, I would say as well, in school, because I failed all of my exams, English, math, science. I was a terrible student, but where I really excelled was in sports. Like, you know, and he was like, Mr. Howarth is his name. Shout out to Mr. Howarth. He was a lighthouse of many of us that had really bad struggle at home, and he made time. He stayed behind after school for hours and hours of his own time because he knew that some of us were afraid of going home or didn't have any home to go to because there was, you know, no food. And stuff like that, and he would stay and just be there for us as well. So I never thought about that. You're bringing back some memories, man. I think it's important.
The point is to reflect on the people, you know, who are lighthouses, and in the world of HR, that I would say that the lighthouse is very much the metaphor for what we do in the way in which we do it.
Yeah.
Because you are there in times of uncertainty. And you have to you have to be present in very difficult situations. So I think there's something universal about the people who we meet along our career journey, who are lighthouses too, not just our personal journey. And I think about it that way because I had personal lighthouses and I had professional lighthouses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's interesting for everyone who's listening right now. Is probably sitting there reflecting. I love that question, honestly, because it brings back so many memories, and kind of all of those moments, individuals, is what shapes you, whether you realize it or not. Kind of back to the beginning of this entire conversation as well. It's those interactions and moments that really, really matter.
And it's why it endures, Chris. It's why the lighthouse both as a metaphor in a way of living and leading and learning is with us, because as we get older, as we progress in our career and in our personal life, you begin to better understand that if it weren't for these individuals, whether it's the neighbor or the coach or the first boss, you wind up in a very different kind of universe. You're not married to who you're married to. You're not mom or dad to the children that you are. You're not friends with the people that you're friends with.
Yep.
Because of these messages that people gave you. 100%. And hence the importance of being even more intentional.
Yeah, like one of the things that I immediately thought of is growing up in where I did, like Shane's dad kept us off the street and put us into sports. We didn't have time to get in trouble. Most of our friends were selling drugs or stealing cars or like literally doing all I'm not even exaggerating in all those things. And he was like, all right, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you got ice hockey training. Tuesday and Thursday, you're doing, karate. Saturday and Sunday, you're playing 2 games. We didn't have time to get in trouble. And he got the focus for us. Like, I don't even know where we would be, if I'm being honest. We would have been out causing trouble, getting into trouble, doing stupid stuff. But again, you don't take that for granted when you're growing up. Listen, I feel like we need a part 2 because this has been an hour already, which is crazy. I've been enjoying the conversation, and I think although we haven't spoke around some of the specific stuff around traditional HR, this is much more valuable. I feel like what we're talking about now transcends all of that, and is fundamental to what we do as well. So I absolutely love this perspective, and definitely recommend everyone to go grab a copy of the book. I'm assuming they can grab it anywhere books are sold from that perspective. Yeah,
you can. The first one is called A Chance in the World, anywhere books are sold. It's also a movie you can find on Amazon Prime. And the Lighthouse Effect is available.
It's right behind you, right? On the shelf.
Yes.
That's the one.
That's A Chance in the World. And there's the Lighthouse Effect. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Listen, before I let you go, what's kind of one final message you would just give to our listeners that are out there? We've kind of covered so much, and it's been.
Yeah, we have. I mean, for the audience, I want to just double click specifically on that message of what our workplaces and workspaces mean to people. The renewed focus on mental health, for example, the renewed focus on community, on connection, is quite literally the antidote to so many of the fissures and breakdowns that we're seeing in so many other different parts of the world, in so many other different sectors of the world. It's just a reminder to all of us that what we do really, really does matter. It quite literally bends the arc of lives and generations to come. I do worry. I think we all worry. Where does one place ladders of hope? Where do you put those? Against what walls do you put them? And I would argue that it's against the everyday people. The everyday people in our lives, the everyday people that we are, that can be that kind of magic, that kind of lighthouse to someone else. And in the process, perhaps heal our own selves. We all, I've learned everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And I've also learned nobody looks like that story either. And there's something to be said for the workplace being the place where we tell each other and where we find those common stories.
Yeah. Well, listen, it was a pleasure. I didn't know we was going to go this direction. For everyone listening, we had this great list of bullet points of questions we're going to go through, but this was so much more valuable and I feel so much more insightful. So, and thank you so much. I feel like if there's anyone who's ever supposed to be in the seat and sit in the seat where they are, it's you. Like you are truly living your purpose, right? And as well. So thanks again, and continue the amazing work. I look forward to doing it again soon.
I appreciate you, Chris. So great spending the time with you.